to make sure you can steal that out of my closet.
Okay, we are now live on YouTube.
Well, welcome everyone to the March CVTA Finance Committee meeting. It's such a pleasure to be joining you all once again, virtual. We have once again an agenda before us that I think that we will get through in no time. But nonetheless, it is always a pleasure to be with every one of you. You all have a statement regarding virtual meetings already in your packets that you would have received prior to today's meeting. Right now, I'll hand it over to the team for the roll call and certification of a quorum. Ms. Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Morning, everyone. I am here. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Here.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Here.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Here.
And Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. And Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mueller. Now we'll move on to any consideration of amendments to the action meeting agenda. I believe there are no changes, so I don't believe we should even have to discuss that. Is that so? There are no changes to the agenda? We'll move on to item 2, the approval of the March 10th, 2021 CVTA Finance Committee action agenda minutes. Is there a motion to approve the Finance Committee minutes as presented?
So approved.
Second.
Get a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. The ayes have it. The minutes are approved from March 10th, 2021. We'll move on to item 3, the open public comment period. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to offer comments via email or person to the staff? Or is there anyone who actually added any comments prior to the meeting?
Mr. Chair, we haven't received any comments prior to the meeting.
There are no comments prior to the meeting. We will move on to item 4 on the agenda, the CVTA Finance Committee meetings chairman's report. All I have for you today is good morning. It's great to see your smiling faces once again. I look forward to today's work. We are making progress, ladies and gentlemen, and I want that progress to continue. There have been some excellent meetings between the localities over the course of the last couple weeks, whether in regards to CVTA or just our regional work of governing this great region already. And some great conversations have come out of that. And it's my hope that we will bring many of the items from those conversations to fruition in the upcoming meetings of the CVTA. With that, we'll move to item 5, the activities report. And I'll now hand it over to the team, Ms. Heater, Mr. Parsons, Mr. Uri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll lead off on this particular item. In your packet, we did provide a copy of a financial activities report, and I know that Debbie Basie is here on the meeting as well to be able to walk you through the information, but I'll just say she's done a phenomenal job in being able to put together, I think, a pretty straightforward report of the revenues as they've been received for the collections on the fuels tax and the sales tax since July and October start dates for collections, and then the distributions to the funds. So Debbie, do you want to say anything in orienting the members of the committee to this report?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Good morning. As Martha had indicated, I am Debbie Basie with Chesterfield County's Accounting Department. The report that I prepared reflects the receipt of the sales and use tax and the local fuels tax that has been collected by the Commonwealth for the authority. It is prepared in the month and reflects the month of the activity when the sales tax and the fuels tax was actually collected out in, by the vendors. You just realize that there is a 2-month delay in when the authority actually receives these funds. And one other thing to note is that October actually includes July through October receipts. And that has to do with the fact that during that time period, the authority was finalizing their fiscal agent agreements, and we did not have bank accounts opened at that point. So going through it, you'll see that the receipt of taxes, total taxes received so far through January totaled a little over 66 million. And those were actually allocated 500,000 to the operating fund. And that was actually based on your approved fiscal year 21 budget. There was 22.9 million that was allocated to the regional fund and 9.8 million to GRTC. And then you'll see the local distributions by jurisdiction reflected there. And approximately 32.7 million was actually distributed to the jurisdictions. And what's reflected below is the activity in the other accounts. The operating fund, 500,000 is in your operating budget for fiscal year 21. Of that, $120,686 of operating expenses have occurred and dispersed. In the regional fund, those funds are just sitting in an account. Towards the end of March, an LGIP account, and I believe it was like the last day of March, an LGIP account was set up and those funds were invested in LGIP. So you did earn $222 of interest. And in the GRTC fund, originally funds were going into a separate account and funds were not dispersed to GRTC. But based on the authorities last meeting, they recommended that the full amount be dispersed to GRTC, and that actually did occur in March. So there is no funds being held currently for GRTC. And that is the report. I don't know if you have any questions or, any comments with it.
Are there any questions about the financial activities report? Any comments from the committee? Seeing none. Ms. Basie, thank you so much for your update. We'll move on to item B, the TAC update. Mr. Uri.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The CVTA Technical Advisory Committee held a meeting this past Monday, April 12th. Several items were covered. There were a number of updates. One of the items we discussed was a certification reporting of the expenditure of local funds. There's an invitation and for all localities to submit any updates to their spending plan for FY21. Request is to submit that during the month of May so we can move towards the end of FY21 with updated spending plans for all localities. We had updates on the regional project prioritization process. That subcommittee is being chaired by Chesterfield County with Hanover County being the vice chair. There's been a lot of work behind the scenes on that effort, and there was a pause on the meetings. We were meeting every 2 weeks, but on Good Friday we did not meet. So the next meeting for that group, subcommittee group, is this Friday. We pretty much have gone through all of the eligible categories of projects and are working on ways to prioritize within each of those categories. So that effort is anticipated to be wrapping up during the month of May, and that will come forward to the Finance Committee and then on to the full CVTA probably in the June timeframe. Also, there was an update on the Regional Public Transportation Plan. Also, there was a short pause on that effort to be more inclusive of the rural localities to make sure that their voice is being heard with respect to the expenditure of the GRTC funds that also are being collected in the rural localities. So what type of mobility services are going to be of interest to those localities is a very important point to consider. going forward. Also, there's was an update on the transit service governance report. For similar reasons, there was a slight pause in that effort to expand the stakeholder input to include 8 of the localities. Initially, it was just, I believe, the 4 majors that were being considered. So interviews have now been done with more stakeholder groups, and that effort is scheduled to wrap up this week. As far as the stakeholder interviews, they've moved on to peer review. We did have a meeting last Friday, and they began covering basically the governance structure for other similar type transit agencies across the country. So that effort is ongoing and also expected to be wrapping up in the month of June. So that's my report. Be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Uri, I got some questions and some comments about the regional project prioritization. My colleagues and I have been discussing how the Fall Line project is one of our region's top priorities for investment. I wanted to know, does the current prioritization process outside the objective and quantifiable analysis support the selection of prioritized projects based on investment priorities of the authority members?
The short answer is yes. Fall Line has been a very important topic of discussion amongst the subcommittee. As Mr. Brown and others know, there were a number of smart scale applications submitted in support of Fall Line. Only 1 of 7, I believe, in the region was recommended for funding. That was in the city of Richmond, and that had other funding on it. So I know efforts in both Chesterfield and Henrico, as well as a joint application between Henrico and Hanover submitted by the TPO, did not score well on smart scale. So we're very sensitive to that issue with respect to how we're building the scoring processes required for the CVTA regional funds. But we are making sure that the Fall Line will be A, eligible project, and B, will, as a regional trail and a regional priority, should hopefully score well so that we can get that funded through CVTA regional as much as possible.
And Mr. Uri, related to that, are we considering how the authority will determine what the benefits of a project are relative to the costs?
Yes, sir. That's actually a requirement of the legislation. It has to be an objective, quantifiable process that does consider cost benefit. The problem we're struggling with, and I know Jeff's working on this on his end, is you're kind of comparing apples to oranges between a regional trail and a highway project, for example. And Smart Scale has not done a good job of being able to score a project such as Fall Line, just because there's no good proxies that they've identified through that process to figure out how a regional trail compares apples to apples to a highway project. So that's a challenge that we're taking on, but the goal is to make sure Fall Line does score well with whatever process is put in place.
Mr. Chairman, this is Carlos, if I may.
Mr. Brown, yep.
One of the things about Smart Scale is that there's the objective process that scores the projects based upon actually regional and district criteria. The Smart Scale system does not weight, for example, safety and or congestion with the same weightings across the state. Depending on your district, you're able to adjust those. But one of the things about Smart Scale is that at the end of the process, right, where the regional prioritization comes into play is with, in our case, me as the CTB member for the Richmond district and the board's discretion. And so I guess one question I'd have for Ms. Ure is it contemplated that you have an objective scoring process, but then at the end of the day, if this body were to say, I understand the scores, but we as a region think that this project is a priority, we would then have the ability to fund that project, notwithstanding that. And for example, I'll give you a couple of examples that many of you all participated in. The project around the raceway, the Henrico Turnpike, was a project that had not scored. The north and southbound both had not scored equally. So we were going to end up funding one portion, but not the other. And we collectively worked together. I went to your respective administrators, and with your support, we reprioritized some of the Richmond District money in the last round to fund that project. And quite frankly, in each round, we've done something like that. The first part of 64 Bottoms Bridge was not something that it scored. And then we worked with the state to do that. So I guess my question is that still contemplated here, Mr. Ewer, or is it thought that the score is the score and that's what gets funded? Or is it the case that the board would not necessarily have discretion to reorder and reprioritize what's scored?
Mr. Brown, thank you for that question. Certainly, the subcommittee has the understanding and expectation that it will be the prerogative of the CVTA to choose whichever projects they want to fund out of that list, but it's the charge of the subcommittee to make sure we develop an objective process that does consider cost benefit. So I think we're looking at it objectively with the expectation that subjective consideration will be given once that list is developed. But for us to basically kind of throw up our arms and say, well, we can do whatever we want, and the CVTA is going to pick the projects they want, I think that's not doing our due diligence as far as the subcommittee work.
Yes, I agree with you, Mr. Brown, that there should be no impediments to funding priority projects that the authority deems are of regional significance. So I think that's important for the overall process to be vetted with the authority members, so we know there are no impediments moving forward. So are there any other questions, comments on this particular topic?
Mr. Chairman, Canova Peterson.
Mr. Peterson.
Well, first of all, Mr. Brown, I want to congratulate you on making big time in Discover Richmond there. If anybody hadn't seen the article on Carlos and his plan, I recommend you take a look at it. Secondly, back to the subject at hand. We've started this organization back in August of 2020, and we've come a long ways. But since that time, since July, all of our constituents have been paying additional 7 cents a gallon in their gasoline tax. Come October, we added 0.7 cents to their sales tax for everything they're buying in the region. And at this point, this is not as objective as Mr. Ewer was dealing with, but subjective in the sense they have seen nothing come from CVTA. I think it's important that we come up and start showing some benefits to the citizens of our communities as soon as possible. Fall line is a possibility of something that has regional significance. We just saw where we have 22 million already in the account sitting there. We have, and I believe fall line would directly impact at least 5 of our jurisdictions. There may be some ways to work within that to make sure that all 9 jurisdictions have some benefit from this. I'm not sure what they are. But I would suggest that maybe we ask our city and town managers and our county administrators to get together and give us use their expertise to give us some ideas on how we can, as quickly as possible, start sharing some results with the citizens of all of our communities.
Mr. Mayor?
First, let me just say thank you, Mr. Peterson. But I would say that Discover article was more about my clan than it was about me, my wife and my son and my kids. But to your latter point, I concur. And what I will share is that we are working with the region, our district office, and with the secretary's office on ways to how do I say this politically correct, to find some additional resources to help accelerate the Fall Line Trail, which of course, if the CVTA was also inclined to support that, then that would be great. So I think that there's some opportunities there to really accelerate the development of that project. But I don't want to be presumptuous that is the project or one of the many that this body will prioritize. I would also point to the fact that the local allocations, the district allocation or the locality allocations are currently being received, and it's one of those things where it's probably going to need to be a marketing job where I'm sure that each of the jurisdictions will be unleashing some projects that will be funded by these dollars. And it might be very important that we remind the jurisdictions to let folks know that the reason these projects are coming off the back burner and happening in the near term is because of the CVTA, even though they'll be administered by the local jurisdictions.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Thornton.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I like to say that I think that Mr. Peterson brings up a good point. And there's something else that we don't discuss that much, but when I look back, when I came on back in 1996, we were really struggling at that time, trying to find the right answers to how to best serve our public and how to do our roads and what have you. And by some miraculous way, we got together. There was a template put together, and we got together, and we came up with a new creation called the CVTA. And so going back to Mr. Peterson's point, how do we get to where we are? You had these 9 localities. And I don't know if we ever think about that, but that was a miraculous job that when they went to the table, if I recall, everybody gave something. And what Mr. Peterson is bringing out is this whole thing about maybe now some of the other localities are wondering, okay, what are they receiving in return? So I think it's very efficacious to go back with a group that help us to get where we are today. And that is that group of administrators from all the districts of the 15th, all the members of the CVTA, and let them suggest some uses and what else we could do with that 35% money. And I think that will help us very much. And what we're trying to do also is making sure we put the best foundation down, not for us, but for the future. So I just want to share that, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, and Mr. Thornton, I just want to add, that's why, I wanted to highlight in my chairman's report, the exciting conversations that the administrators, the executives of the localities are already having, and I'm excited about that. And I think that is allowing us to move in the right direction.
So I'm hoping, so we will, that maybe that your group would suggest that we put those administrators to work and have them to give us a future report, future recommendation on the use of this regional monies there, because maybe there can be some ways in which we can accommodate what Mr. Brown is saying and what some other person is saying so we can reach all persons. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Do we have one more?
Mr. Carroll.
Mr. Carroll?
Just want to say I concur with the comments of all of our colleagues. I think that I think a regional discussion with all of the administrators would help. And I too concur with you that I think the discussions that have been taking place have been very, very positive. I do think that there is one positive thing that the community can look at. And that is that report that we just saw, where the amount of dollars that have already been sent back to the localities in their 50% portion to help with transportation needs within each jurisdiction, which was funds not necessarily that were there before or were funded in different ways. And so there is already some positivity that's come out of this for the communities in that respect. And I think when we get to the 35%, there are great opportunities there. And I also think that the 15% going to GRTC is when the governance procedures are done, will show that we're working on a very productive transportation plan for the region. So I think there are some really good positive things that have come out already. And that's just what I wanted to say, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. With that, I believe
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Parsons.
This is Mr. Gregory.
I am Mr. Gregory. I'm sorry.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, just want to touch on the statutory requirements. I believe Mr. Parsons posted the operative language from the code, and that is in 33.2 3701 subsection H, which touches on the prioritization process or describes the prioritization process and directs the authority to develop a prioritization process based on an objective and quantifiable analysis that considers the benefits of projects relative to their cost. Only projects evaluated using such process may be funded pursuant to subdivision D1. And D1 is, of course, the 35% regional funds that are to be spent on projects benefiting the locality. So it seems to me that as Mr. Brown was describing, you have the objective quantifiable process for evaluating the projects, but ultimately the authority as a policy-making body and as a political body needs to make the policy decision after going through that process as to what it's going to fund. So I think there is room for that subjective judgment to be a part of that process at the full authority level, certainly. But Mr. Uri mentioned that the process that they follow at that level has to be objective and quantifiable. All those things are true and accurate under the code. But I think ultimately there is flexibility for the authority. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Peterson.
Canova, I just want to follow up on Mr. Thornton's thoughts about the full CVTA. And I don't know if we need to do a motion to recommend to the full body of the CVTA that the administrators come together to advise us on this and put a timeline on it. So I'd like to ask Mr. Thornton what his thoughts are on that.
Well, Ms. Mayor, do I have I'd like to suggest that we get that group together as expeditiously as possible so that we can have their input, so we can, look over that. So at least with this next month is May, at least by June, maybe, I think that would give us adequate time. Not rushing anyone. That would be that's my idea.
Mr. Chair, I might recommend that be communicated by the members of the authority to their administrators, just to be able to allow flexibility in scheduling and allow them to meet so that we can follow that timeline that Mr. Thornton said, but do so as efficiently as possible.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman.
Recommendation, Mr. Chair. I think that the members of the authority can make that happen, and I don't think it requires a vote for us to do that.
I agree, Mr. Kara. I think that, the elected members here can please, as the, I think we can report back to our localities and Lisa speak to our administrators about getting together pretty soon. Mr. Gregory?
Yes, sir. I think that's probably the best direction to go in. Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Typically, staff meetings are not considered meetings, public body meetings, and I think we want to keep it that way.
Yep.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, just for a point of clarification, I think for those who are listening, we're not suggesting that the administrators gathering would supplant the process that developing the objective criteria. We're just asking them to come together to brainstorm
On the projects.
for projects from an advisory perspective to us, such that, I guess just to clarify, you kind of we'll have two steps. You'll have the math project, which Mr. Ewer and the TAC will undertake, which will, calculate benefits and outcomes or develop that process. And then you will have kind of a more subjective process by the administrators saying, here are the things that we know that our constituents care about. And then we as the CVTA will have both of those items to use in evaluating project funding, recognizing that by statute, you can't fund the subjective without first putting it through the objective, if that makes sense. Does everybody kind of agree? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, because there could be some confusion that by asking the administrators to come together in this way, we're somehow saying, well, we're not going to focus on or rely on what the TAC is doing. I don't think that's what we're saying. I think what we're saying is we want the math solution and what that puts out, but we also want to hear from our administrators subjectively what they believe is most important to our constituents in the region. Is that fair summary?
I think that's a fair clarification, Mr. Brown, and I don't know whether or not there's any disagreement amongst the committee on that clarification.
Chair, I think it's right on point. I think it's no different than having a constituent, call, whether they call the mayor's office or call the county administrator's office with a complaint about something that's happened within the jurisdiction. Specifically, we talk about transportation issues. And so I think that, the administrators certainly will have probably a large collection of those complaints and issues from all the jurisdictions that they can bring forward and discuss and say, okay, what type of problems do we need to solve, and how do we make those recommendations to the CVTA to have the TAC look at and then go through the process. So I think he's right on point with what he said.
Yep. Well, sounds like we all have a little homework then. As if we didn't do the homework already, in our respective jurisdictions. Mr. Peterson, I'll give you the last word on this topic.
Okay, I'm thinking that that we do need to make a recommendation to the full CVTA, and if Mr. Thornton would like to make that as a motion, I'd be happy to second it. But because I'm realizing as good a conversation as this is today, this includes only 5 of our 9 jurisdictions, and by doing it at the full CVTA, all 9 jurisdictions will be involved in that.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that as a motion that we have the administrators of the 9 localities get together and to give a report back to the full body CVTA in an expeditious time, which probably June could be that time limit.
And I will second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor for the administrators to give a report on the topic of, I guess, prioritization of projects to the full body on what date? The next meeting?
The June meeting, Mr. Mayor.
The June meeting of the full body of the CVTA.
Yes.
My question before we take a vote is there another way we can actually accomplish this without actually having to do this in front of the full entire body?
I don't think so, Mr. Chairman. We have 9 jurisdictions, and I don't want any of them to feel like they're left out.
Well, another way they could do is that the administrators could still get together, they could call by phone.
Mr. Gregory?
That's Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's what I might suggest. It's always, as you mentioned, part of your homework as members of the Finance Committee and members of the full authority to be in communication, right, with their CAOs respectively, and to get their input and to bring that input to the full authority. All 9 jurisdictions, not just those represented here on the Finance Committee. So I would suggest that that process should be going on and should have been going on continuously from the very beginning.
Correct.
And certainly there's no harm in reminding the jurisdictions and their representatives on this full CVTA to solicit that input from their CAOs and to bring that input back to the CVTA. I would suggest that probably the more efficacious way of doing that would be informally, so that the CAOs can confer amongst themselves, confer with their staffs, including those members of the TAC, and so that the quantifiable objective process is properly complemented by the CAO input that's provided to the members of the authority. So it's sort of an informal process that's complementing the more formal process that's developed through the TAC. So that's what I would suggest. It's a friendly suggestion. I'm not sure you want to put the onus on the CAOs to provide a formal report at the June meeting. If that's the CVTA's wish or the Finance Committee's wish, certainly proceed. But I would suggest there may not be a need to do that, and it might be better, or you might find yourselves with a better product if you allow that process to unfold through the members of the authority.
Chair, speaking of
Mr.
the motion.
Carroll.
I think I understand what Mr. Peterson's concern is, and the concern certainly is that we as only 5 are trying to make a decision or an action recommendation for all of the 9 jurisdictions. And I think we probably can find a way to communicate with the other jurisdictions, not part of this call, to let them know what the discussion was, let them know that and get their input on it. And then because quite frankly, the county administrators from these 9 jurisdictions and city, they don't need our permission to meet on anything. They can decide to do it anyway. I'm pretty sure they do it all the time. But the question here is, what's the best procedure for us as the Finance Committee to relay that to the rest of our peers that this is something we think is important. And so, again, whatever way that works, I'm fine with.
I think what we can do is informally communicate that to the other members of the CVTA, whether it's through my report between the authority members and local staff, so that we can ensure that the recommendations of prioritization are aligned by the time it reaches the committee. Also we can include it in our minutes as well. There are many other informal ways I think we can do that instead of formally taking it to the full body as a recommendation for all localities. As you said, Mr. Gregory, I do believe that these members are and dutifully are already in communication with their county managers and their chief administrators, and I see no need for the body or this committee to actually set that as a mandate. So there is a motion on the floor.
if, Ms. Mayor, if I may, well, I could withdraw that and we take the advice that I think I'm hearing. The most important thing is what we're trying to do is put the best foundation in place. So as long as we are together on this, making sure that what we're trying to do, so I could withdraw the motion as long as we're going to continue that avenue.
And I'm going to request, thank you, Mr. Thorne. I'm going to request the staff of the CVTA to help with that communication to the other members of the body. And Ms. Heater, we are open to your recommendations on how we go about communicating that in a informal way. Mr. Gregory as well. I think we kind of have that recommendation already on the table, but we can work to make sure that communication reaches all of the other members from the other jurisdictions.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Mayor,
And Mr. Chairman, I will withdraw my second on that if Mr. Thornton is withdrawing his motion. And I would suggest, though, informally, we still hold to his June guideline that we would like to have things back. I know we probably have a number of our CEOs and administrators probably monitoring this meeting as we go. I know Mr. Badetsky is looking in, and I'm sure we have that from our other jurisdictions. We may have some people from the smaller jurisdictions on watching this on YouTube as well. So hopefully we got a lot of ways to get it out, but their input, I think, is so important to what we're trying to do that I think we do need we've hired these people because of their expertise. Let's use it.
That's exactly right. And I have full faith that these experts will have something before the body in some sort of way, informally, in the near future.
And Mr. Mayor, may I say too, I use the analogy of talking about the family. And here again, as I referred to earlier, when you had the administrators get together to get us to where we are today, we always wanted to be acutely aware to make sure all members of the family feel as if they are listened to. And I think those are the things that we need to pay careful attention to, because when we're talking about the larger localities and small localities, we are saying we have one family, and that's the CVTA. That's just always like to kind of put that out a little bit. Thank you.
I concur, Mr. Thornton. I thank you for your input. I thank Mr. Peterson for his input as well. And we will continue now with the agenda. I guess we're now on the certification reporting FY22. We'll now receive some updates on spending plan reporting, locality quarterly updates, and annual reporting requirements. Ms. Heater?
I apologize. I'm not sure what that would be in reference to. Mr. Parsons, are you willing to take that one?
I would ask for some clarification as well. I'm sorry.
I would suggest, I think we're on item 6, old business.
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chairman.
Okay.
Would you like to have a discussion about the timeline for the certification and the spending plans before we move to the MOU?
Yes. Could you just real quickly?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I think Mr. Ure touched on some of these points, but as members of the committee are well aware, there are a lot of moving parts that all need to kind of link together to be able to move to the activation of the dollars that are available both to the jurisdictions, the GRTC, and then of course the regional fund. We just spent a lot of time talking about, I think, the prioritization process for the regional fund. So we'll take a step back and talk also about the process for the local expenditure of the jurisdictional dollars and the GRTC expenditure. So Mr. Parsons, do you want to speak just in briefly again to the timeline for how those pieces lock together?
Yes, happy to. The TAC is overseeing this process, and there's really two components. One is for FY21 spending plans, which is what we're currently operating under. There is an opportunity on a quarterly basis to update those spending plans. So we'll be looking at one more update at the tax May meeting. And then the second item there is for FY22, where each jurisdiction will be asked to submit their projects that are contained in each jurisdiction spending plan for the next fiscal year. So starting July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. So we're both are currently in process here in the last quarter of this fiscal year. But the TEC is planning to receive those requests at their May meeting, at which point it will be there will be a recommendation back to the full authority for the June meeting to take action on those spending plans.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Thank you, Ms. Heater. We'll move on to now item 6 under old business, the draft memorandum agreement with GRTC. All the localities in GRTC are in agreement with the MOA. Am I correct?
That's my understanding, Mr. Chairman. Since your last meeting, we received additional input, very minor additional input from GRTC's legal counsel. That has been incorporated into the draft. We supplemented that draft because just some clerical items and some typos were identified and formatting issues. So we circulated that latest version the other day. But substantively, that is consistent with what was in your packet. We've gotten the word from GRTC that they are in agreement with this version. All the localities, again, have had the opportunity to review this several times. Was circulated to legal counsel for all the respective member jurisdictions. Everybody, I believe, is on board with this, and we would, staff would recommend the Finance Committee move to forward this draft memorandum of agreement with GRTC to the full body with a recommendation to approve. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, one more question I have, Mr. Gregory, is that,
Yes,
do
sir.
we know what actions have been taken since our last meeting to have the GRTC's CFO added to the finance director's working group so that he is involved and aware of the developments from this committee?
I believe that's occurred. I would defer to Ms. Heater on that, but I believe that's in Mr. Parsons, but I believe that's been done.
Sure. Yes. Mr. Zinzarella is actually here today along with Ms. Tim, but he is included on the communications that go to each of the directors of finance or their designees related to CVTA business. Mr. Zinzarella is also included on any of the email distributions with regard to the financial distribution. So we've included him in any communication that occurs. The finance director's working group has not been convened since the last finance committee meeting, so that has not occurred. But he hasn't been left out of anything that has occurred with that group.
Okay. Anyone from the committee have any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I've actually read this MOA from the first word to the last word that came out in our packet. But then I just got the revised version yesterday and I have not read that. Could, Mr. Gregory, could you tell us what the difference is between the one we got yesterday and the one that came in our packet?
Yes, sir. If you'll turn with me now to page 2 of the MOA, right there before you, there's 8 pages in this version of the MOA. On page 2 of 8, you'll see subsection A there, 2A. In the version, I'm not sure, it might have been corrected in this one. The version that we had, there was an extra period at the end of 2A. And so that was corrected. I believe it was corrected in this version here. And
I'm not concerned about the punctuation, Mr. Gregory. I'm talking about anything of import.
Well, right. That's what I meant earlier, Mr. Peterson. There was nothing substantively changed between the version that was in the packet versus the version that was circulated 2 days ago. It's the same. It's just the punctuation corrections and the formatting, which shrunk the agreement down from 8 pages to 7, because the signature block was put up on page 7. There was room for that. So that's all substantively, it's all the same and consistent with the version that you read word for word.
Okay, thank you for that. And I do have one question, though, as to the substance. This is more to Mr. Gravery. I was very surprised to see and hear so much verbiage on mediation and disputes between these two bodies. That seems to me like it's really sort of overblown for a cooperative situation, particularly in which CVTA is probably providing most of the financing now for the organization. Why would we have mediation clauses in here?
Unfortunately, you have to, in these kinds of arrangements, you have to provide for a resolution process if there is a dispute. Mediation is typically a more friendly process than litigation. And so rather than allow the parties, which should be on a relatively friendly footing, of course, to go directly to court if there's some dispute about the allocation of funds, the distribution of funds, the expenditure of funds, we wanted to build in there a mediation process. The original language governing that process was fairly was less specific about how that process would unfold. Legal counsel for GRTC wanted to provide a little bit more structure for that process and formalize it a little bit more. And I can't dispute that. I certainly would agree that providing more structure for that kind of a process is probably better. We certainly would work to avoid that. And there's a process in the agreement before you get to a resolution process, before you would even approach mediation. So I have confidence that I don't believe the mediation process would ever have to be relied upon or utilized, but it is there just in case. And certainly if that process is not successful, the parties could go to court if necessary, but I seriously doubt that will ever occur. But that kind of a process will also be incorporated into the MOAs with the respective jurisdictions, as noted previously and as repeated to the legal counsel for all of the jurisdictions, including and also with GRTC. This MOA will serve as a template for the MOAs with all of the member jurisdictions. So that kind of a process will be there for the member bodies to rely upon too. So it's unfortunately a legalistic process that we think is necessary to build into it as a way to resolve things if they get to that level of dispute. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I guess it does. It just felt to me like we were sort of starting off on a bad foot here of anticipating conflicts, and that I don't think any of us do anticipate. And so I did, and talking to our legal counsel here in the county, that we did question what the need for that. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you there, Mr. Peterson. I think it's important. I don't think that the mere fact of building in this MOA, a mediation process, necessarily sets anybody on a bad footing. I think it's just, when you get the lawyers in there, they have to anticipate potential problems and try to provide a process to resolve them before it, in a way to avoid litigation, right? And that's what this process does. It basically provides a saucer for the hot tea to spill over into and to cool off before you go to court, right? So it's to neutralize conflict. And again, hopefully there's a process, a sort of a discussion process that would occur long before any mediation process were actually entered upon. So I don't think we'll ever really need the mediation process, but it's there just in case. So I think it's probably a good thing.
Sounds like preservation and protection, Mr. Gregory.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Any further questions or comments? Any further discussion?
Make a
Is there-
motion, Mr. Chair, to move it forward to the full committee for consideration.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Mr. Carroll. There is a motion to move this forward to recommend for approval by the full board. Is there a second?
I will second, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Peterson has seconded. I believe this is a roll call matter, so Ms. Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Aye.
And CTB, Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for item 6.
Thank you so much. Now we'll move on to item 7, the fiscal year 2022 revenue projections. Today we should be joined by, I believe, Mr. Matt Harris with the Chesterfield County team, who will serve as our fiscal agent along with the Department of Taxation projections. Mr. Harris.
Yes, the image on my screen is about to get better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will be a relatively brief report, but I do think it's well timed with the other subjects that you all have discussed here today. So this is a preliminary forecast that's been prepared by the Chesterfield team, as you say, and I think it's well timed as you pivot and start to think about fiscal year 22, not only from a budgetary perspective, which I know is one of the items that you'll be taking up pretty soon, but as you get into as you've discussed how to activate those monies and what projects the authority would recommend and push forward. This gives you at least an initial framework to come off of. And this is based on local sales tax experience going back a long ways for the 9 localities. The wholesale fuels, we don't have quite as much data, so there's a little bit more uncertainty with that, but overall we feel like this is a useful framework to at least get the conversation started. And I know that the finance working group is probably needs to, as Mr. Heater says, we haven't convened since last meeting, but probably would be well served to do so and discuss this a little bit further. But we're happy to share any of the assumptions with those teams. We have had some pretty in-depth conversations, I know, with the city in particular and Henrico County as well, as getting a little bit more into the weeds here. But again, it's a nice beginning framework. This would provide approximately $65 million for the 35% pool. So as you think about what those projects would be, again, at least gives you sort of that initial estimate to work off of. But we will continue to refine this as we move forward. But this is one of the roles that Chesterfield would play as fiscal agent, or at least as our part of the fiscal agent agreement. Happy to take.
So, were you ready for questions?
Yep, we're ready for some questions.
So,
Mr. Brown, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. And thank you for this analysis. And so I think what you're saying is that there's about $65 million that would be available annually in the regional pot. And I think I've raised this before, the question of whether or not we would be considering or thinking about leveraging. If you look at our peer authorities, clearly what they've done is they've taken those dollars and they've bonded those dollars out in order to, and I forget the equation, maybe you can remind me whether it's 7-to-1 or 10-to-1, such that you could unleash a number of regional projects kind of almost simultaneously, right? I mean, you have the ability, if you take that $65 million and you bond it to $650 million, then there are a number of significant projects that we could undertake in a fairly short period of time, which is really I will tell you just from the thinking about why it was important to do the CVTA is, you take the dollars that are available, a limited portion in smart scale, you leverage that with the regional dollars, and then you also look at what you can do when you kind of seed the ground with your jurisdictional dollars, and all of a sudden many of the persistent transportation challenges that we have wrestled with, but never had quite enough money to do, all of a sudden become achievable. And so I didn't know where we were in our process of thinking about that. I know that, maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse, but going to your point, Mr. Peterson, and maybe I'm a little jaded because I've been doing this for about a decade now, but there are roundabouts that cost $20 million, right? And so, at $65 million a year, trying to find projects that are impactful to the entire region, or doing enough projects that everyone in the region feels they're getting the benefit of this investment, will be very, very tough if you have to do them one at a time. But if you could bond these dollars, and you can all of a sudden, address, the trail and, 64 and White Parkway and new interchanges in Western Rico and new bus routes in the city of Richmond or what have, then all of a sudden people see immediately what this is doing. And so I just didn't know where we were in our thought process around that. Maybe I'm just getting ahead of the gun, but thought I'd raise that at this point.
Mr. Brown, we're happy as the finance working group. I think we would take that mission on, and we're happy to come back to this body with kind of what those estimates look like. But I think you're right. I mean, it's 65 million if you don't peel anything else off. And you're right. This is a pure cash viewpoint on it, and it does not include anything that you have put in the bank leading up to 6:30. So that's another. You got a little bit of cash that's not incorporated here that would be a nice variable to have. But we can absolutely bring you back. I think 10 to 1 is probably a fair ratio. So you're talking, $500 to $600 million, I think, easily, if you were to do the whole thing. But we can bring you back a framework, not picking projects by any stretch, but a framework of, what a full dead out kind of scenario would look like, maybe a middle of the road, and then, make sure we can refine this, just sort of these cash estimates. Happy to do that if it's the will of the finance committee.
Any further questions, comments?
Well, I guess, Mr. Chair, should I make a motion and ask for that to be done, or is there any resistance or consensus around getting that information about the bonding opportunity, or what would be available by bonding?
Mr. Harris,
I think it's a good idea.
Do you think that that's something that could be done prior to the May Finance Committee meeting, or should we target that for June?
No, absolutely. We can turn that around very quickly. Martha, if you would, help us get a meeting on the calendar for the working group, we can bring something, a straw man to the working group, and then do it in plenty of time to get it, in a future packet, if that's the will.
Okay, we'll shoot for the May Finance Committee meeting unless schedules don't allow, but we'll target for that May meeting.
Works for me.
Any further questions for Mr. Harris? All right, seeing none, we'll move on with the rest of the agenda. Item 8, the April 30th, 2021 public hearing and public notice of FY 2022 budget. Ms. Heater.
Thank you. Just for clarification, can you see a memo on the screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Just wanted to call your attention to the fact that the public engagement process for the FY 2022 budget has been initiated. We've scheduled advertisements in various local media papers, digital and print editions, and are preparing to be able to put that content out to the public in time for the public comment period that starts tomorrow in anticipation of the April 30th public hearing. The commission, or the authority rather, will have their public hearing during the regular meeting on April 30th, and that will be the opportunity for the public to give comment. I did want to share with you that we have incorporated the FY 2022 revenue projections that Mr. Harris just shared with you into that package that will be available to the general public. So if my screen will cooperate, Can you see the Excel document? No. Pardon me, 1 second. I'll reshare. So members of the public will have access to a document that shows the total revenue projections that were provided by the team that Mr. Harris referenced, the allocation of expenses, the fiscal year 20, pardon me, that's a typo, fiscal year 2022 operating budget for $500,000. This is the amount that you reviewed at your last meeting and forwarded to the authority. The 15% calculation for the regional transit, the regional projects set aside, and the estimated distributions for the localities. Mr. Peterson, I will call to your attention that there's an asterisk there next to the Ashland figure, which is a proportion from the Hanover allocation. So bear in mind that your team still need to confirm what the distribution of the school-aged children calculations are for purposes of that. So this is a rough estimate based on 2021 figures and will need to be updated. So that number is expected to change once we have that. The second page of the public comment document will include the operating detail, and that is the set of figures for the expenses associated with administrative and operating. So this will be what is available to the public for review and the subject of the public hearing. I wanted to share with you that with regard to the line item for audit services, we have, since your last finance committee meeting, completed the request for proposals process led by the auditor of public accounts. Ms. White from the city of Richmond and I sat on the selection committee along with the team from Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. And the actual figure for the negotiated contract for audited services is at $19,000 as opposed to the $15,000 placeholder that you reviewed and approved last month. So I wanted to inform you of that and to make a possible recommendation to you that when this item moves forward for authority consideration for approval of the FY 2022 budget, on April 30th, perhaps a member of the committee would like to recommend updating that figure, essentially transferring $4,000 from the reserve for contingency line item to the audit line item. It would not change the entirety of the $500,000 set aside for administrative and operating, but it would bring that particular line item to the amount necessary to fulfill that contract for the audit services. Any questions on that?
Any questions from the body? No questions at all, Ms. Heater.
Wow. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to item 9, the CVTA staffing and support services. Ms. Heater.
Thank you. Last month, you asked us to put together some recommendations for you to consider to open the discussion about the continuance of Plan RVA providing a support role for next fiscal year. I reviewed the existing MOU for support services for the current fiscal year and put together a draft document that itemizes the sections of that MOU that I think could be updated to be able to accommodate a renewal or an extension into next fiscal year. I think that based on our staffing anticipated needs and levels, we could keep the budget for compensation at a level funding from this year to next year at about $200,000. And so that could be continued for the new fiscal year. I also took a look at the services in light of the negotiation of the administrative agreements with Chesterfield County and the city of Richmond. We have a little bit more clarity on how Plan RVA plays a central role in coordinating those activities, as well as the finance working group. So we've included some reference to that and updated the sections that would be to be in accordance with the financial administrative procedures that have been adopted. So those are more, I would say, administrative in nature, but really just kind of to bring the MOU into compliance with the policies and procedures that you've adopted thus far. Moving to section B, I think is really the bulk of the content of the document, really thinking through what the support services would or could look like provided through Plan RVA. And so we would continue to provide a set of key tasks, deliverables, if you will, that I will outline in a moment. Continued planning, facilitation, logistics, and coordination for your meetings, assuring that other administrative responsibilities and compliance around FOIA or any other conflict of interest requirements, things like that for the administration of the body are adhered to, supporting the financial management and record keeping, including that administrative and operating budget. Plan RVA is maintaining the records for that and in coordination with Chesterfield County as the cash manager and City of Richmond as the audit and review partner. Providing that support, completion of the programmatic tasks, as you know, right up to the end of this current fiscal year, we'll be working on the prioritization process with members of the authority, the finance committee, and the TAC, and continuing with, I would expect likely the outcomes of the report related to transit governance and the audit, the regular submission of audit requirements. Depending on the authority's decisions around regional prioritization, I do think that Plan RVA can provide a valuable service to you in leveraging access to our software and data analysis tools to be able to evaluate the impact on the network of particular projects. And I think that that will continue to be a useful resource to you. So as you know, those of you that have been engaged with the Transportation Planning Organization, significant investment over the last several years and continuing to be in developing that transportation demand model so that we can evaluate the impacts of various activity along the network. And then we also have access to other consultants that you'll be able to access through cooperative procurement in the ways of, I know Mr. Thornton is very well aware of our public engagement activities and you know, the opportunities that we have there. Similarly, to this year, we would continue to provide the same accountability, quarterly reporting, work status reports associated with our invoicing. So moving on, the set of deliverables for FY 2021, this current fiscal year, they were really designed around startup activities. I think transitioning to FY 2022, we would be looking more to be able to move the authority forward to action in a lot of the items that you've talked about today. So, you know, certainly establishing a schedule. I think that there is an expectation that you as committee and authority members will be able to have a little bit of a lighter calendar in the next fiscal year, making sure that the public engagement process is as it should be. Any sort of solicitation of proposals for professional and non-professional services, depending on what you decide to do around some of the activities with investment strategy, financing of projects, project management, all of those things, we would be able to assist you with maintaining the backbone structure of your financial policies and procedures, assisting certainly the City of Richmond with the audit requirements, moving the projects to action for prioritization, and continuing with the compliance reporting. And I think finally, one of the things that you talked about at the last meeting was this intentionality around having that discussion of what your long-term staffing needs are. We have initiated with Mr. Thornton's guidance, an invitation for both Monica Bachman and Kevin Page to attend the April 30th full authority meeting, to be able to share with you some information about their staffing structure, a little bit about the history of how their respective organizations that do function quite differently have evolved, and why they made the decisions that they did surrounding staffing, and what they think their needs and benefits have been of those decisions. So that discussion can initiate in April, but I would expect that Plan RVA could provide support to you as you continue to deliberate on your executive staffing needs for next fiscal year. So that's a really brief summary. The key performance indicators that you asked us to include don't change a ton from this year to next, you know, really focusing on effective project management, administrative support, and support to you as members, effective financial management. I've updated to make sure that we're taking responsibility for the activities that we can take responsibility for, and then continuing, obviously, in the spirit of today's conversation, certainly to make sure that that communication among member jurisdictions and authority members is occurring in a way that is moving activity forward. So that was a lot. Wanted to be able to put this in front of you today for discussion. If there's feedback that you have about things that you'd like to see included or not included in this, I thought was that we could have discussion today. Any adjustments or additions, deletions that need to be made could be done, brought back to you at your May Finance Committee meeting with a potentially a recommendation to move forward to the full authority at the end of your May meeting.
Are there any questions regarding the staffing and support services laid out by Ms. Heater? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Heater, for your work on this, the team's work on this. And we'll move on further into the agenda, into other business. Item 10, are there any future meeting topics that anyone would like discussed before the Finance Committee?
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to kind of recap the conversation from earlier today, we will be working to convene the finance work group. And so that group will be discussing those projections as well as I'll say the sort of the strategy or framework that Mr. Harris mentioned. And so we'll hopefully be able to bring back results from that discussion at your May Finance Committee meeting. And we'll also bring back the recommended support services MOU extension for next fiscal year at your May meeting. And also we have I think staff has a homework assignment to be able to promote that communication among the local government executives and transportation lead staff so that that's driving for the June authority meeting. But certainly during the Finance Committee meetings in May and June, we'll want to make sure that you are getting updates on how that communication is going.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Heater. Item 11, the CVTA Finance Committee members' comments. Any comments from our team? I will take a point of personal privilege and just, he thought that we were going to get out of this meeting without recognizing the fact that today is Mr. Brown's birthday. Mr. Brown is 47 years old today. I wanted to make sure everybody knew that our member to the Commonwealth Transportation Board is celebrating his birthday today. I hope he has a great birthday. He only has 3 more years remaining inside his 40s. I met him when he was probably in his 30s. But, it looks like everyone around us each year is always aging. Happy birthday, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think you're right. I think I was in my 30s and you were probably in your 20s.
Yes,
I won't say young 20s, but you were in your 20s for sure. Again, really appreciate the collegiality of this group. And, I want you to know that I did not deem it an offense to spend my birthday morning with you all.
I'm glad you were able to be present today and for us to at least celebrate just a couple hours of this great day with you.
I will say that when I went off screen, though, I did take a call from my mom.
Oh, well, priorities, brother, priorities.
That's right.
Any other comments from the members?
Happy birthday,
Yeah,
Mr. Brown.
Chairman, I just want to say bon anniversaire to Mr. Brown. Happy birthday in French.
Our fluent member in French just said happy birthday to you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown doesn't know French, though.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton. And I will say that when I met Mr. Thornton, I was in my 20s.
Mr. Peterson, did I see you?
I was just going to jump ahead a little bit to our next meeting. I hope we can think about getting back together face to face. I think we put our kids back in school now and what have you. I think it's time for us to come out of our closets too and start meeting publicly again.
Well, you see, Mr. Peterson, I'm in my office, not in a closet, but I don't know where you
I
are.
understand. I'm in mine too. I'm in mine too.
Yes, Mr. Peterson, thank you. Thank you for that reminder. I should have mentioned that as part of the staff report. We are at Plan RVA prepared to host smaller meetings as the Finance Committee was previously. Those of you that, well, all of you that have participated in those know that we do have the capability to host smaller meetings with a group in person, but also create that virtual attendance. So, Mr. Chair, we'll work with you, and if it is the desire, we can accommodate that for your May meeting. So, and can provide the opportunity for members to choose whether in person or virtual is the better fit for them.
Well, it is my hope. I mean, I don't see any, now that the vaccine is available to all 16 and up, it's my hope that everyone is taking the opportunity to go out there and get vaccinated. I am still one shot away, and so I'd like to get the full complement of the vaccination, of the vaccine before I'm in person fully, but I'm sure it's something we can work on together to make sure that everyone is safe and healthy during these meetings and after these meetings as well.
Thank
Any
you for
further
that,
comments?
Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you for that. I will share that as probably most of the jurisdictions are functioning, we are not requiring the vaccine of our staff members. However, we do enjoy some communication with them for those that are choosing to share information about the status of their vaccines. And I would estimate that the earliest of our staff who have had access to the vaccine would not have fulfilled the 2-week waiting period after their second shot until the end of May. So we are very carefully monitoring what we know around access to vaccines, but are respecting the privacy of our staff members to make those decisions for themselves and not make it be an open discussion as part of their employment. So I appreciate your comment on that, and definitely want to make sure that our staff has the opportunity to maintain privacy and safety during this time.
Thank you, Ms. Heater. Any further comments? Now, folks, our next meeting is May 12th of 2021. It is obviously, we will talk further about the details of that meeting. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is a motion to adjourn? Thank you all so much. I appreciate your time. Happy birthday, Carlos.
Thank you.
Everyone take care.
Bye. Happy birthday, Carlos.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.